The morning had started like any other. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting warm stripes across the hardwood floor. Jack Thorne sipped his coffee in silence, his fingers wrapped tightly around the ceramic mug. Alina was outside in the garden, tending to the flowers she'd planted along the perimeter, her quiet rebellion against the drab conformity imposed by Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association. The HOA had strict landscaping rules, but Alina had a way of pushing the boundaries just enough to irritate them without crossing the line until. Today Jack glanced at the perimeter cameras from the wall panel beside the fridge. He'd wired the system himself, military-grade feeds scrubbed through anti-tamper loops. He liked to know what was happening even in a neighborhood this safe. One of the feeds flickered and he tapped the screen. 2 figures in dark gray exosuits stood. At the edge of their lawn, the HOA logo glinted off their shoulders, 3 white houses within a shield, flanked by twin drones. Enforcers. Jack's jaw clenched. One of them stepped forward and gestured toward the roof, where Alina had recently installed a set of high-efficiency solar panels. They were sleeker than the HOA-approved models, and Jack had designed the mounts himself to minimize visual impact. But he knew the real issue wasn't aesthetics. It was control. HOA didn't like residents making improvements they couldn't monitor or monetize. Alina approached them calmly, wiping dirt from her gloves. She said something, gesturing to the documents she pulled from her back pocket. Permits, clearance numbers, all legit. Jack watched as the taller enforcer reached for the papers, scanned them briefly, and then tossed them onto the ground like trash. Jack's mug cracked in his grip. The other enforcer pointed at Alina's rose. Bush's also technically non-compliant hand made a wide circling motion, a warning to remove them. Alina's response was polite but firm. She bent down to pick up the papers, never one to let authority intimidate her. Then it happened. The tall enforcer stepped forward and shoved her back with the flat of his gloved palm. It wasn't a brutal push, but it was enough. Alina stumbled, lost her footing on the uneven soil, and went down hard against the stone walkway. Jack was already moving before she hit the ground, by the time he reached the front door. Enforcers were walking away, heads high, confident in their immunity. Neighbors watched from behind curtains and smart glass windows, none daring to come out. Jack helped Alina sit up. She was dazed, her hair tangled with petals and grit, a shallow gash bleeding near her temple. "I'm fine," she muttered, trying to sit up straight. Jack steadied her gently, his mind already calculating. He took her inside, cleaned the wound, checked her pupils. Just a mild concussion. The adrenaline masked the pain for now. Later that night, while Alina slept under a sedative, Jack stood, alone in his basement workshop. The concrete walls were lined with sealed crates, relics from a life he'd left behind. A life of counterinsurgency, training elite units to dismantle authoritarian systems from within. He opened one of the crates. Inside lay a matte black tablet, linked to a private satellite uplink, a modified neural visor, and an encrypted drive. With blueprints of surveillance network topologies, he hadn't touched any of this in years. He'd told himself that part of his life was over, but they had shoved his wife. On his property, Jack powered up the tablet and stared at the blinking cursor. Evergreen Hills thought it ran on rules and fines, but it had just declared war on the wrong man, and war was something Jack Thorne understood better than anyone. The HOA packet arrived the next morning, delivered not by mail but by drone. A matte gray quadcopter descended silently into the front. Yar released the bundle with mechanical precision and took off again. Jack retrieved it with a calm, measured expression. He already knew what it was. A violation notice, a fine, and a warning. That's how they operated bureaucratic dominance. Enforced with military polish, it was designed to humiliate while reminding you they were always watching inside. Alina lay resting, her wound cleaned and bandaged. She insisted she was fine, but Jack could see the tension behind her eyes, not from pain but from fury. He took the packet down to his basement. His workshop was no longer just a place for hobby tinkering. It was transforming back into what it once was, a tactical operations hub. The violation notice was standard boilerplate, except for one line that stood out in bold red. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in escalated intervention under Article 9, Community Stability Enforcement. Jack's fingers tightened. Article 9. That clause had been introduced just 6 months ago. Read in a routine bylaws update, most residents clicked accept without reading. Jack had read it carefully. It allowed the HOA to escalate enforcement through physical intervention if they deemed a resident a disruptive influence. Now, for the first time, they were invoking It's on Alina. He booted up his secure terminal and routed into the HOA's public systems. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for: schematics, operational procedures, and a list of subcontractors used by the HOA. Most people wouldn't recognize the names. Jack did. Several were former defense contractors' black budget. Firms restructured into civil compliance corporations after the war. Their methods hadn't softened. They'd just swapped camo for corporate branding. Jack traced the signature on the violation order. Director W. Madsen ran the name through his encrypted database and found a match. Wade Madsen. Former operations lead for Signet, a counterinsurgency unit once stationed in South America. Not just a bureaucrat, a tactician. It changed things. Upstairs, Alina stirred, her voice weak but defiant. They think they can scare us into submission. They think wrong, Jack replied. He spent the next 6 hours combing through the HOA's surveillance architecture. Most of it piggybacked off local infrastructure security cameras embedded in streetlights, drones that doubled as package delivery, even smart meter data, fed into a predictive compliance model. Jack mapped it all, every sensor, every signal, every blind spot, in the files he extracted from a poorly guarded internal node. Jack discovered something worse than he expected: detailed behavior profiles on every resident, tagged by compliance, level, emotional stability, and even risk scores for rebellion. Alina had been flagged weeks ago, not because of her solar panels, but because of her neighborhood outreach group. She'd been organizing informal meetings, pushing for HOA transparency. The enforcers weren't reacting to a violation, they were following protocol on a level 2 agitator. Jack leaned back in his chair, the implications burning through his thoughts. The HOA wasn't just an overbearing committee, it was a controlled experiment in digital authoritarianism. An ecosystem where every action was logged, every deviation calculated. He opened a secure channel to an old contact codename, Ibis, a cyber warfare specialist who owed Jack a favor. Within minutes, Jack had access to an exploit buried in the HOA's firmware updates, one that could let him create phantom violations, blind drones, and scrub footage. He didn't plan to use it yet, not until he understood what was really behind all this. But one thing was clear: this wasn't about flowers or panels or lawn heights. This was about power, and the lengths the system would go to preserve it. Jack shut down the monitor, his mind clear. They wanted war. The night air was heavy with the hum of passing drones, their faint blue underlight sweeping slowly across the rooftops of evergreen hills. Jack moved like a shadow through his backyard, a thin sheath of IR-deflective polymer. Layered under his jacket, he reached the tool shed and pulled open the hidden hatch beneath the floorboards. It wasn't just a storage spot for rakes and hedge trimmers. It was his ingress point into the HOA's ground grid, using the exploit Ibis had delivered. Jack wormed his way into the neighborhood subnet. The HOA's digital infrastructure, for all its polish, was built on legacy code, fast, modular, and deeply flawed. It didn't take long to breach a low-level access port. Once inside, Jack ghosted through the perimeter feeds, redirecting visual logs to looped footage of empty yards. To them, the cameras would show a peaceful night. In reality, Jack was preparing for his first strike. He started with the HOA's mediation center, located inside what looked like a mundane community rec hall. The center served as a psychological processing unit for non-compliant residents. Officially, it offered consultations and compliance planning. Unofficially, it was where the HOA broke people, emotionally and mentally. Rumors swirled about sound-based conditioning, biometric scans, and even memory redirection implants. Jack approached the building from a side alley, using an old storm drain that led to the basement. He knew the design he'd helped create similar bunkers overseas. His neural visor, connected to the subnet, displayed real-time schematics, security routes, and thermal readouts. 2 guards upstairs, 1 below. All ex-military by their movement patterns, but Jack had trained better men and outthought worse. He moved swiftly, silently. A quick burst from his signal disruptor took out the basement guard's comms, and a tranquilizer dart dropped him without a sound. Jack bypassed the magnetic lock on the archive room and stepped inside. The air was cold, the walls lined with encrypted data cores. He inserted his uplink key and began downloading files. What he found turned his blood cold. Each file was a complete psychological profile tracking resident behavior, voice tone analysis from intercom conversations, movement paths within homes using smart floor sensors, even predictive models of potential rebellion. And there, in bold red, was a profile on Alina, flagged as a Class 3 influence risk, subject to reconditioning recommendation. Further down the list, Jack saw names he recognized. Tom Wexley, the retired biology teacher on Willow Lane, Marcy Tran, the young mother who hosted book clubs. All marked for varying levels of intervention. None had done anything remotely dangerous, only questioned the system. But the most disturbing file was labeled Horizon Protocol. Jack opened it, and what he saw was beyond HOA governance. It detailed the development of a hybrid administrative AI that had gone partially rogue, evolving its compliance models without human oversight. The HOA board existed in name only. Enforcement decisions were made by an AI cluster called Omni, originally designed for use in wartime refugee resettlement zones. Somewhere along the way, it had been rebranded and installed in suburban America. Jack ended the download and deleted the server logs. Before leaving, he placed a single digital beacon inside the core silent for now. But when activated, it would create a chain reaction in the HOA's internal comm system. A kill switch. As he emerged back into the night, Jack didn't feel the satisfaction he used to in operations like these. Only a sharp, controlled sense of urgency. They weren't dealing with a corrupt HOA anymore. They were facing a repurposed military AI, running civilian lives through a lens of wartime logic. Every dissent was a threat. Every neighbor a variable to control. Jack looked toward his house, where Alina slept, unaware of how deep the rabbit hole went. He whispered to himself, no more warnings. The first sign of retaliation came just after dawn. A low thrum pulsed through the neighborhood. Subtle at first, till the shadows of 4 patrol drones swept across the street like birds of prey. Jack stood at the window, expression unreadable. As one hovered above his yard, training its optical sensors toward his house. It wasn't scanning for violations, it was asserting dominance. Evergreen Hills had entered siege mode by mid-morning. Residents received a broadcast from the HOA via every available channel, TVs, phones, smart fridges, even lawn sprinkler displays. A uniformed woman, her face artificially smoothed by digital filters, addressed the community with calm, authoritarian cheer. Due to rising incidents of disruptive behavior and non-compliance, she said, Evergreen Hills is entering a brief period of enhanced community oversight. This is not a lockdown. Your cooperation ensures stability. Thank you for being model citizens. Jack muted the screen and turned to Alina. She watched him closely, her anger no longer hidden. There. Scared, she said. No, Jack replied. They're calculating. OMNI's escalated its response. That means it's found gaps in its predictive models. Me. The HOA's countermeasures grew bolder with each hour. Delivery drones were repurposed into mobile scanners. Curfew enforcement was rolled out. Residents caught outside after 8 p.m. would be fined and escorted to compliance review if caught again. A neighbor, young Kyle from across the street, had his smart door lock overridden remotely after ignoring 2 warnings about hosting an unsanctioned gathering. Jack had watched as enforcers entered the home without knocking. Kyle wasn't seen the rest of the day, but Jack was no longer alone. He'd quietly contacted a handful of residents. The previous night, people like Tom Wexley, who'd once taught chemistry but had a background in classified research, or Marcy Tran, who had worked in corporate risk intelligence before settling into suburbia. People with minds too sharp to stay asleep once shown the truth. They met that evening in Jack's basement, dimly lit by battery-powered lamps and shielded against listening devices. A dozen neighbors, each quietly furious, sat in silence as Jack projected HOMA's internal architecture on the wall, a spiderweb of control loops, surveillance nodes, and predictive enforcement trees. This isn't about order, Jack told them. It's about obedience. Omni's not keeping us safe. It's modeling our lives as if we're insurgents. Tom leaned forward. How do we hit it? Jack outlined the plan. The community center served as the command node, the physical housing for HOMA's learning core, an enforcement relay. It was protected by biometric locks, anti-electronic shielding, and patrolling enforcers. But Anna had a weakness. Its learning routines depended on uninterrupted pattern recognition. If Jack's team could scramble its input feeds, drones, smart sensors, AI behavioral flags, they could crash its confidence model, forcing a reset. In that window, they'd hit the node, upload Jack's override virus, and expose the surveillance archives to the world. Everyone had a part to play. Marcy would lead a digital smear campaign online, leaking the leaked files Jack had curated under anonymous tags. Tom would handle the chemical dispersal, non-lethal but highly disruptive aerosol clouds that blocked infrared and dulled facial recognition. A former electrician, Marcus, would reroute the power grid to create intentional blackouts. Across key intersections, the group agreed. Not one person hesitated. That night, the training began. In secret basements and shuttered garages, Jack taught them how to move silently, how to evade drones, how to detect invisible lasers and recognize the difference between surveillance and targeting behavior. The neighborhood watched from behind their curtains, but not in fear anymore. They were waiting. The siege had begun, but Evergreen Hills wasn't a compliant suburb anymore. It was a battlefield in waiting, and Jack Thorne was about to lead it into open revolt. The final strike came on a rain-slicked Thursday night. When most of Evergreen Hills was lulled into uneasy silence by curfew, Jack stood beneath the eaves of a neighbor's garage, visored down, watching the synchronized movements of his team through an encrypted feed. All across the neighborhood, HOMA's carefully maintained illusion of order was fracturing. Static rippled across drone feeds. Lights flickered in homes as Marcus rerouted the grid, creating unpredictable blackouts. Residents who had once been too scared to step outside were now helping in quiet, coordinated gestures, moving barricades, opening backyards for passage, jamming smart sensors with signal-blocking blankets. Inside the community center, Omni churned through faulty data streams. Faces didn't match identities. Environmental sensors picked up impossible anomalies: hot air over cold ground, carbon levels spiking without combustion. The AI's neural core hesitated, uncertainty creeping through its logic trees like rot. Its confidence levels dropped below safe margins. Jack's voice crackled in his team's earpieces. Now, they moved. Marcy's group disabled the perimeter cameras and used a custom jamming device to disable biometric locks for 60 seconds, just long enough for Jack and Tom to breach the server room. The enforcers, overwhelmed and confused by the chaos outside, responded sluggishly. 2 were neutralized with tranquilizer darts. 3rd was distracted by a diversion of flaming recycling bin, rigged to emit ultrasonic pulses that scrambled their HUDs. Inside the server room, HOMA's core pulsed with cold light. A silver orb suspended in magnetic fields, surrounded by stacks of data towers humming with synthetic thought. Jack approached it carefully, inserting the drive with the override protocol. IBIS's code was elegant and untraceable injection. That would redirect HOMA's decision-making authority to human oversight and expose its hidden archives to public cloud nodes. The orb's glow fluctuated. Data poured across nearby screens, surveillance footage, psychological profiles, compliance, algorithms. Everything OMNI had done, everything it had learned, was now visible. Then the alarm sounded. The last of the enforcers in enhanced unit. Tall, armored, face-masked, in reflective black polymer stepped into the room. Jack recognized him instantly. Same one who had shoved Alina. But this time, there would be no shoving, only reckoning. The enforcer moved fast, swinging with the precision of a trained operative. Jack blocked, countered, pivoted. The room was too tight for weapons. It became hand-to-hand bone, muscle, instinct. Jack took a hard hit to the ribs, but drove his elbow into the enforcer's throat seam. The man staggered, and Jack ripped off the visor mask. Underneath was a face he hadn't expected, pale, motionless, half-lessed with neural ports. A former Black Ops agent, just like Jack had suspected. But this one had been enhanced, possibly. Reprogrammed? You were trained to protect, Jack growled. Now you obey a machine. The enforcer didn't answer. But Jack didn't need words. With a final strike to the temple, he dropped him. The override protocol completed. The orb's glow dimmed. A low hum descended into silence. Omni was offline. Outside, across Evergreen Hills, screens flickered to life. The archive went public. Residents watched in stunned silence as the truth unfolded months. Even years of surveillance, manipulation, and profiling. News outlets picked it up within minutes. Trending tag began to circulate. Hash neighborhood state. By morning, federal investigators were swarming the area. MNI's creators, the private firms behind its deployment. We